So, Chris Lee, thank you so much for being here. Good to connect with you.
Likewise, thanks for having me on.
So, before we get into kind of the meat of the topic itself, I wanted to start a little bit about you. What got you interested in politics and football? What made you
hmm
want to become a historian in that space?
Yeah, just for context, my day job is I actually work in PR and digital marketing. But back in the day, I did a dissertation in European Studies degree. So both in UK in a place called Coventry and a year in Madrid. And watching soccer in the UK is largely apolitical. So there's no kind of real sociology to it outside of probably the Glasgow Derby in Scotland. Of Rangers and Celtic, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with, and we may well touch on it at some point. But because I had a politics degree, I went to Madrid and Spain, where it was very, regional identity is a really strong thing, and the way it's expressed is often through the national sport, which is soccer and football. Um, and so I did my dissertation was 10,000 words, which was quite a sizable chunk of my degree
Hmm.
of the final score. I did it on football and regional identity in Spain expressed. Sorry, start again. It's regional identity in Spain is expressed through football. That's it. And a case study of Real Madrid and FC Barcelona. So this was in the 90s, late 90s. There wasn't really anything in English about it apart from Simon Cooper's book, Football Against the Enemy, which is the only first book that really in English that touches on um, soccer as a political sort of tool. Um, Football publishing itself wasn't really that much of a thing. I think Fever Pitch came out in 1991, so it was quite Nick Hornby. That was quite groundbreaking. It's the first book that really made football a serious topic, really, in many ways, mainstream at least. And then I guess I'd parked that for a long time. I found myself ground hopping a lot with work. And ground hopping, by the way, just those not familiar with it, is basically you're not necessarily tied to go to any one particular stadium to watch any one particular team. You like taking games in wherever you are. So obviously, I took a load in Spain when I was a student, and when I was abroad, like lived in Australia, played in amateur leagues in Australia, and also whenever I was say in Europe, mainland Europe, with work, I would go like I'm in Amsterdam. I'm going to see Ajax. I'll see that Royal Antwerp are at home tomorrow over in Belgium. They're only a like 90-minute train ride away. I'd go and watch Royal Antwerp. So that's kind of what got me into it. And then I started chronicling it. Realized there's a big community of other people out there. Set up Outside Right, which is my blog. Added a podcast to that. And then added two books since then, which is the first one was Origin Stories of Pioneers Who Took Football to the World. That came out in almost three years ago this month, actually, in April 2021. And I followed up with The Defiant History of Football Against Fascism, which came out in October 2022. And I've got a third one coming out next year. And I've been kind of teasing it out, but that's more or less me looking around Irish football. So League of Ireland and the Irish League. So in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, lots of politics, lots of amazing stadiums as well. So that one to look out for.
So I know this isn't necessarily a question that could be answered briefly, but
Mm,
I'll have to ask you for the Cliff Notes version. So, what is the history of politics and
mm.
football in Europe? How did they merge?
Oh, it's been there since the beginning, really. If we assume the sort of year zero of the association rule book is when it comes out, because obviously lots of codes of football in before the association rule book came out, which is what we'd call soccer now, right? 1863, a group of clubs got together in London, um, and the I guess it was sociological in England and Scotland when it arrived there, and it didn't really get political. So I guess went to Ireland, and it became a sort of there was quite often because it was um, an issue between imported games and people who wanted to protect um, actual Irish games like hurling and Gaelic football, and that's sort of kind of 1884. The Gaelic Athletic Association was set up, and there was often quite a bit of rancor between the two as to you know whether or not you were allowed to play soccer as well. And then it gets as it becomes part of national awakening, soccer becomes part of national identity in places like Uruguay and Argentina, who are relatively new countries at the turn of the 20th century. The sort of criollos, as they're known, the sort of like local born people, often of Italian or Spanish descent, take the game over from the English, the Scottish, the Germans, who traditionally, ran the game from, the gentleman class, I should say, the kind of elite business people. And it comes the game of the people, I guess, in there and a lot of other places. It's part of the national awakening in Turkey in the 20s, Egypt, as well as a sort of anti-colonial force, likewise in India. And then I guess the first person to really politicize football was Benito Mussolini, the dictator of Italy, from 1922 until 1943, although he has sort of hung off in parts of Italy, in northern Italy, till 1945 when he was killed. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to delve into that, because the legacy of Mussolini's kind of impact on football still resonates really within Italy today.
Well, yeah,
That,
let's
sorry, wasn't a short answer, was it? Sorry,
No,
Rob.
no, no. I mean, I short as in like, I know that books have been written on the topic, so it's like, how can you summarize it? But no, let's dive into some of the Italy stuff. So I'll tell you, a brief story, because being an American, that was just something I didn't really know about for a long time, and I have family over in Italy, and I think it was my second trip over
I can't
there.
hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Check, check.
Don't know what's
Hello,
happened here.
hello.
I can't actually hear you. You're not coming out. My headphones not coming out my.
Oh, okay. I think I'm coming in on my end here. Let me check my settings. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Check, check, check.
How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Oh, cool. I can now, but you're coming from my screen. So anyway, yeah, sorry. So the bit where I lost you was just after the Mussolini point.
Yeah, so yeah, I want to dive into some of the Italy stuff, because the way I became cognizant of all this, aside from just, enjoying the game, is I have family over in Italy, and being American, I didn't know about any of this stuff. But on my second trip to Italy, I acquired an AC Milan jersey. And the only reason AC Milan was a team that I liked was because they were one of the only soccer teams I got to watch being in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, one of the only Italian soccer teams. So it was basically, you could see Liverpool, Manchester, AC Milan, Roma. That was about it. I mean, unless you had a special, I mean, now I'm able to get all of Napoli's games and stuff like that, but this was some time ago. And so I was wearing an AC Milan jersey, and my Italian cousins asked me, because it was Berlusconi's team at the time.
Yep.
So my Italian cousins asked me if I liked Bush, and I didn't understand the connection between. I thought they were just randomly asking me, and I said no, and they were like, "Well, then why are you wearing that shirt?" And I was very confused by the follow-up question. Like, it didn't make any sense to me.
Mm.
And then my cousin explained all of that to me. And, or at least gave me kind of the cliff notes about right-wing team and left-wing teams. I didn't know that was a thing.
Mm.
And then he asked me about American football, and he said, "Well, is such and such a Republican team or a Democrat team?" And I said, "We don't really have that. That's not a thing." I mean, I
Mm.
guess one could make the argument that all American football is kind of right wing, due to like the hyper militarization of it all, because but that's a whole other can of worms for a different day. But so that's how I got into all of it, Chris. And
Mm.
so what is kind of the history in regards to Italy?
Yeah, I mean, were your cousins from the south? Were they from Napoli, Naples?
Originally, but they
Right.
live in the north now.
Well,
Napoli is my family team.
right, because you will probably know that there's a huge north-south thing also in Italy, just geographically, economically, and Naples will always say that they've been kind of looked down on by the north.
Mhm.
Obviously, Milan being one of the key centers of that. And Diego Maradona in the 1990 World Cup semi-final, which was held in Naples, quite famously, because he was playing for them at the time, delivered 2 titles for them, for Napoli. He, said to the Neapolitans, who are you going to support tonight? Are you going to support Italy, or are you going to support like me and obviously Argentina? And there's obviously a huge connection anyway between Argentina and Italy.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was quite interesting. Obviously, as you know, Italy kind of were nailed on to win that home tournament, and of course they lost that semi-final in the penalty shootout. Maradona went on to lose the final, but still, it was yeah. There is that north-south thing, but if we dial back to the 20s, so Mussolini comes in. He doesn't even like football, but he understands that, and Italy isn't particularly good at it, by the way, at this point. But he understands it political potential as a unifying force. So Italy was founded by a thing called the Risorgimento in 1861. A guy called Garibaldi drove that. I'm sure everyone's heard of Giuseppe Garibaldi. And so basically there was lots and lots of city states almost, and this does come back to the current sort of mindset of the Campanile, which is the bell tower, as you know. So people are fiercely loyal towards their local club and their local province. Mussolini saw football as a way of uniting that. So of the countries, he said something along the lines of, "We have made Italy, now we must make Italians." So in the 20s, he was on the mission to do that. There's a thing called the Carta di Viareggio, which was the Charter of Viareggio, which is a town on the west coast, where they got together and said, right, this is the blueprint for the future of Italian football. They founded Serie A, which is the league. They rebooted the Coppa Italia as a nationals competition. So they wanted representation from everywhere. And you mentioned AS Roma recently in your podcast with Attila the stockbroker, the team
Mhm.
from Rome. They were founded as a fascist project in many ways, because they were three teams. He wanted one strong team in Rome to represent the capital. There are three teams that did merge to form AS Roma, and there's one team that refused to join, which was Lazio, which you mentioned on your podcast there as well. They now have a really fierce Rome derby. They met this weekend at the time we're recording, actually, and that has a political edge, but kind of like, I won't go into that just now. They also founded AC Fiorentina, which is from Florence, because they wanted out of two clubs, because they wanted one strong Florentine team. He anglicized a lot of the names, Italianized a lot of the English-sounding names. A lot of Anglo-founded clubs like Genoa, like Milan, actually, Milan Cricket and Football Club, as it used to be known. That had to be changed from Milan, which is the English word for Milan, to Milano. Likewise, Internazionale, who is the big rivals of Milan, they were Swiss founded. Obviously, they got an international name, and he didn't like that either. So he changed that to Ambrosiana, which is after the I think the saint of Milan is St. Ambrose. So it's there's a lot of identity that goes into Italian football right from the off. In the 1920s, this is. So invest in stadia. There's a member of his kind of political wing pretty much everywhere involved in the Olympic Committee as well as the FA, and they win the right to host the 1934 World Cup. There's lots of rumours about how Italy came to win that, but they did. And just to show how it wasn't really the national sport at this point, it wasn't his priority. He didn't turn up to the after party, apparently. And he created a trophy to give to the winning Italian team that was much bigger than the Jules Rimet trophy, which was what they were given at the time for winning the World Cup. So he saw the propaganda value, and Italy did win the amateur 1936 Berlin Olympic gold, and then they retained the World Cup in France in 1938. So there was no doubt by then that they were at least one of the best teams. Bear in mind that the British Association, so in particular England and Scotland, who were the strongest at this time, didn't enter this competition, and neither did Uruguay, who were world champions in 1930, because a lot of European clubs didn't come down to their World Cups. They said, right, we're not coming up to yours. So it's actually there's a bit of an asterisk around Italy as where they were kind of the best team in the world at that point. England did beat them it was the infamous Battle of Highbury in 1935, Highbury, Arsenal's old ground in London. But for the Italians, it was a moral victory, because they were down to 10 men very early on due to an injury and didn't have substitutes in those days. So that was highly politicized as well at international level. By the 1938 World Cup, Italy is actually involved in the Spanish Civil War. Their fighters and bombers are involved in, say, the bombing of Guernica, which you might be familiar with. Pablo Picasso made a big artwork about it as a big sort of anti-war protest, and so it's one of the first civilian bombings. So they're involved there. So by the time they come to France for that 1938 World Cup, there's a big Italian diaspora who's anti-Mussolini. There's a big Spanish diaspora in France who's escaping the Spanish Civil War across the Pyrenees, and so this World Cup becomes highly political as well in an anti-Mussolini way. So you get lots of chanting. They are holding the Roman salute as the right arm aloft at this point in the first match. They're getting booed in Marseille, and the coach is a guy called Vittorio Pozzo, who's the only guy to have won the World Cup twice as a manager, 34 and 38. He, after the booing dies down, he orders his team to hold that salute again, so that they, just show that we're not intimidated, type thing. So yeah, it was very political with those two World Cups involving Italy in the 1930s, and it's a highly politicized era, really. Also in 1938, you have England going to Berlin and playing Germany, then was Nazi Germany, and they're obviously trying to appease Adolf Hitler and keep out of trouble, even though he's kind of invading Czechoslovakia and annexing Austria and stuff, and making noises about Poland and things. And the England team shamefully hold the salute at that point, just sort of for politics. And so it's a highly politicized era at that time, and that kind of is when football and politics really just mix. And whenever we say, we didn't mix, and it's like, it shouldn't mix, and it always does. And even at a big level like that, international level sport, local, regional level, either as part of our identity, or also because it's the most popular sport, and also even a micro level. So I was speaking to a Scottish guy the other day, and said, whoever you support is going to be a bit of a political axe. He's a Celtic fan and a Scotland fan, so he probably supports whoever's playing against England, and that he may not view it like that, but it is a political act in a way. Whoever you're supporting, and you'll support anyone who plays against Rangers likewise. So, in these little micro personal ways, we are committing politics, I suppose, when we by who we support, and then but it does translate at an international level. So it's massive in the 30s, but it's massive now. Look at the fuss that's made every time that it's held at wherever the tournament's being held. There, that host is scrutinized, especially with obviously Qatar, Russia recently, the World Cups. And so it's Argentina 1978, infamously under a military dictatorship, that still went ahead. So it's always interesting. There's never a dull moment, really, football and politics.
So when did kind of football against fascism, like is its roots with anti-Mussolini, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, I mean, Mussolini was the first fascist leader, so he kind of, I would say, invented fascism, but he was like, he certainly set a mold for certain European leaders in the 20th century, and far right ones in South America in the 60s onwards. But I'd say as soon as he came in, obviously he had his opponents, but like I said, football wasn't super huge in Italy until it got really good in the late 20s, early 30s. So at this point, it was very difficult to show any kind of dissent at home without getting arrested. You see little things like there's a great case of a guy called Bruno Neri, who was a Fiorentina player, and there's a wonderful photo in 1931, I think it is, when Fiorentina's new stadium is being built, the what is now known as the Artemio Franchi. All the players are up. They're playing a team from Vienna called Admira, and all the team are doing the Roman salute apart from him. So he's doing this little one-man act of defiance, effectively. He was kind of like, his career potential, him and other players were kind of curtailed by that act. He ended up playing for a team called Lucchese down in Lucca, which is also in Tuscany, but where they were managed by a Jewish Hungarian called Egri Erbstein, who was allowed to. I mean, I think foreign coaches were allowed, but foreign players weren't, unless you were of Italian descent in those days. So, so he ended up there, like a lot of other players did, in the third division, effectively. But it's quite interesting because he then went on to fight Mussolini as a partisan, in the foothills around Italy and stuff in World War II, and actually was shot. I think he was protecting his friends, like just like trying to create cover for them to escape, and he did that. So he kind of died in a very heroic manner for what he believed in. So it's quite that's quite interesting. But there, yeah. So that's where it sort of kicks off in a sort of small way in the 30s.
Well, so is that how? Because it's still sort of a little bit of a mystery to me. Like kind of moving on to sort of more present day. Like, how is a team a right wing team or a
Mm,
left wing team? Like, is it just based on the ownership, or is it like? And I know some of them have histories. Like, how did FC St. Pauli
mm,
become FC St. Pauli? How is Livorno like the main left? I mean, I know obviously the history of the Communist Party in Italy has to have
mm.
something to do with that, but how did it remain in the football club for all these years? Like, are there just some explanations of for that, or is it just something that gets passed down?
Essentially, I mean, some mostly it's usually not the ownership, just so I'm clear. It's like usually the fans.
Okay.
So you get a reputation because sometimes it's both. But in the case of, I mean, just you mentioned St. Pauli there in Hamburg. That was a fan-led thing very much back in the sort of late 70s, early 80s. There was a lot of some. It's in the sort of Reeperbahn area of Hamburg, the port area. So it's always been a bit, you know, they've had their social challenges around there, should we say? And there was a lot of squatters and things like that. And they found it's formed by a lot of guys who'd gone into HSV, Hamburg SV, which is the other big team in Hamburg, and they'd seen a lot of right wing activity in the Curva and the Tribuna, as it's known, the stands, and they thought, we don't like this, let's do our own thing, our left wing anti fascist thing over at St. Pauli, and they kind of like took over the Tribuna there, and the so that's kind of how the St. Pauli thing happened. It's quite interesting that they, like Livorno, as you mentioned, has got a communist history anyway. So some curva being the Italian word for the sort of end stand, the curve, literally. So in Italy, they're highly politicized. Sometimes you have a right wing one, sometimes you have a left wing one, and often at the same club you can have different political persuasions even within the same curva. So it's kind of like it's often quite often the way, but in Italy there's far more right wing ones than left wing ones. But the interesting about St. Pauli is it's kind of become part of its brand over the years.
Mhm.
Even before the internet, it was like word of mouth. People would go to Europe, do some ground hopping, and go, like, I've just seen this phenomenal experience at St. Pauli. I really like what they sort of believe in, and let's recreate that here. And so you get a sort of rise of left-wing ultras in the 80s at places like Rayo Vallecano in the 90s as well. In Madrid, they're like at the working class area of Vallecas, south of kind of the south of the city. Cadiz down in the south of Spain, they've got Brigadas Amarillas, the Yellow Brigade. They are also quite left wing in Spain. Again, probably if they are political in Spain, it's often quite conservative or right wing curva. The And then obviously there's other clubs that have taken inspiration from it. I think you've mentioned Portland Timbers in America, right?
Yeah.
And then also in Ireland, in Dublin, there's a club called Bohemians, which one of the oldest clubs in Dublin. They were founded in 1890. They've always had a fan. Um, they've always been fan owned. One of the few, I think there's 5 clubs left in the Republic of Ireland that are fan owned, and they are one of them. And they've always had that sort of that ethos, but they're very much political in a non-political league in that they're kind of doing refugees welcome and things like homeless things for homeless people, prisoners, things like that. So it's very charitable, almost sort of the way that it behaves, and it gives space in its away shirt in particular um, for kind of creativity almost. So there's them. Then in the English non-league, it's quite interesting as well because, as I mentioned before, football in England, certainly not so much Scotland, but in England, it's very apolitical mostly. Apart from Liverpool has had its moments because of circumstances around it, its individually and the city. So, but on the whole, it's pretty apolitical, except at lower league level, people who have been to places like St. Pauli, places like Rayo Vallecano, like Livorno, have come back and said, we've seen this amazing ultra culture. um,
Mhm.
let's recreate it. The irony being that ultra culture actually originally came from a mixture of the Brazilian torcida scene, as it's known, which came in via Yugoslav fans who'd been to the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, and their fans have had Hajduk Split in Croatia and gone, oh, I really like these guys making a lot of noise, sort of singing, banging of drums and things. Let's do that here. Then it sort of mixed with the English, what was then the hooligan culture in the 60s and 70s and 80s, which was really just kind of, there was no mostly not political. Well, there was a bit of right-wing active bits and bobs in it, but mostly just like violence. And that in Italy they kind of merged the two. You had the ultra culture of the mixture of the Tosita and the hooligan. So it's quite interesting how that came about. But yeah, in the lower English league, they've taken the friendlier elements of the St. Pauli style and created quite a left-leaning kind of experience of places like Clapton, which is a community club in East London, Dulwich Hamlet in South London, which used to be my local club, and they're getting 3,500 people in a 7th tier match, and that's unheard of. That's like 10 times what you would expect to get at that level, pretty much, or maybe not that much, maybe 8 times. And yeah, so and Whitehawk in Brighton, which is another sort of little community club that's doing a lot of left. It's quite left wing, so it's sort of catching up. This catching on everywhere, really. Just sort of like these little communities. It's quite. I quite like it. It's quite interesting, but like so, I don't know when you talk about like the culture of it. At that level, you're not really signaling to anyone, getting much attention outside of whoever's in the ground, right? So you sort of to yourself and the away, the few away fans that to say like, this is what we're about, this is what we believe in. It's not really until you get on television and with a global audience that you can actually sort of make that politics more widely visible.
Hmm. Well, going back to Italy for a bit, someone like Maradona, like
Mm,
when I go to, I have family in Napoli, and
mm,
then I have family who is also originally from Napoli, but ended up going up north for, I think mostly like work related
yeah, of
reasons. They
course, yeah.
ended up north, but you see him everywhere,
Hmm.
and he was also just a well known communist, and so is that something that is sort of just universally known and celebrated? Because, like, sometimes you'll see that mentioned in monuments of him, other times, it's not mentioned, he was just a great football player. So and even having spent time in Napoli myself, I don't really know the answer to that question, so.
Yeah, I mean, on the Maradona thing within Napoli itself, I guess he won their first titles, first 2 titles. They're obviously champions at the moment at the time that we're speaking, but it's a
Mhm,
very different era. They've been an established club for a long time. They've obviously had the success before. Maradona was he wasn't expected to come there. They were, he'd left Barcelona under a bit of a cloud. He was the best player in the world at the time. Certainly up there. I think 86 would have cemented him as the best player. But before that, obviously, had players like Platini, Socrates, Zico, the other great players at the time. Um, but it was a massive coup to get him to play for Napoli, and he stayed there for 4 years, which is quite a long time. So yes, he's iconised there. He's kind of politically stuck it to the north. They were the first Southern club to win the title. If you count Rome as a kind of part of the north. It's the capital, so I suppose it's kind of like that. But the south,
mhm,
it's as it's the south of Italy is very different from the north, and
yeah,
especially so in the 80s. And so they feel that they were looked down on. I think we alluded to this with the Argentina 1990 match there earlier. So he was a massive hero from that point of view, and he's got, as you mentioned, all those murals, the massive mural in if you go to the Spanish quarters, the Quartieri Spagnoli, in Naples, it's just phenomenal. You see him everywhere, don't you? It's like on the street
mm,
corner, just little graffito of Maradona here and there. But I think also that Naples he's known as the Pibe de Barrio, the street boy of gold, golden boy, effectively. In Argentina, it's kind of like this mythical figure, the boy that makes good, from the street. And I think there's probably quite a bit of similarity, if you don't mind me saying, from between Naples and Buenos Aires in terms of possibly financial outlook, obviously aesthetically similar looking sort of buildings. Obviously, no massive volcano in the backdrop in Buenos Aires, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like it's got that, and also obviously there's a big, like I said, Italian connection. A lot of whom are from the south, although a lot of the people that founded Boca Juniors, for example, were from Genoa, actually, Chineses as they're known down there, the Genoese. So there is that kind of connection, I think, already between Latin America, especially Argentina, and Napoli as a place. And I think that he kind of also helped the fact that he kind of stuck it to the north, brought them that title, and in him they found kind of like a hero. And this speaks to the whole thing about politics and football. It's like, how can we? It's like a level playing field, basically, for even if you're economically or socially from a different strata to the people that you're playing against. It's the level playing field, and he kind of leveled it for them effectively by sticking it to the north and bringing the title to Napoli.
Hmm. So you, in our written correspondence, you used a term I was not familiar with. So I just want to clarify this. What is campanalismo?
Campanilismo is the loyalty to the campanile, the bell tower. So it's a phenomenon in Italy where you're very loyal to your local um, region almost, and also you're, even within a region such as Tuscany, you can have intense rivalry between Livorno and Pisa, for example, both
Mm.
Tuscan cities, but both fierce rivals. So, so there's no like, oh, we're Tuscan, let's get on. But that's why people are quite fiercely. I mean, that's why it's been very difficult as part of what Mussolini was about, was trying to create that sort of unifying element really to Italy through football, which because of this regional thing, because obviously, as you know, there's huge dialectic differences as well. I
Yes.
think the
Yeah.
Italian that we,
Whenever
Hmm?
we're taught the Florentine dialect. So for
Yeah,
me, when and I'm not fluent, but I'm conversational. I do okay when I'm over there. And but when I go down to Napoli, it's humbling because I just
yeah.
really struggle. And then native Italians will say things like, "Oh yeah, we struggle too." And I think they're just being polite. I think they're just
Mm.
trying to make me feel better about myself. I don't know for sure, but I think they're
No,
just being polite.
there is a huge dialect thing. Like you said, you mentioned the standard Italian we'll speak was based kind of on the Florentine thing, which I think only a handful of percentage of the population actually spoke at the time of the 1860s or whenever. And you've got like Sardinian, obviously a completely different language, and different dialects in the south. And yeah, you said, I speak conversational Italian, but I struggled in Naples. I said it's just like especially at a football match. So we obviously went to Napoli, and I went to another great place down the coast. When you're next there, if you head towards a place called Castellamare di Stabia. So it's on the way, it's just between Pompeii and Sorrento. It's a club called Juve Stabia, which is beautiful setting amongst these kind of stone pines, the classic Italian setting, really, with the mountains behind it and Vesuvius. So I went up Vesuvius in the morning, came down, watched some soccer at Juve Stabia in the afternoon. It was brilliant.
Oh, that sounds
Um,
beautiful.
but yeah, it's totally different. And but this goes back to what I'm saying before. It's like highly regionalized there, and it's the same in Spain, where um, the you've got the Catalan region, you've got Madrid, the center, you've got which is the capital. So if you'd like to kick against that, you've got Athletic Club de Bilbao, who just won the Copa del Rey this weekend at the time we were recording, for their first trophy in 40 years. They're a huge standard bearer for Basque country. They only play Basque players or players with Basque heritage. Unlike their rivals Real Sociedad, who are just out from down the road there in San Sebastian, they will take foreign players, but they also develop a lot of local talent as well. So it's kind of highly regionalized in those places, a lot more than other places within Europe.
Hmm. Well, yeah. Then you also have the Roman dialect, which is
Mm,
also kind of its own. I don't know if you are you familiar with Ciro Calcare, the cartoonist?
no.
So he has a couple series on Netflix. Like he was a comic book artist that got picked up by Netflix, and you can watch, and they have English translations, but he typically speaks a really thick Roman dialect. And there's
Mm,
this I haven't seen this video, but allegedly it's out there where he has a translator who's I think it was German. It was with a German outlet. So he had this Italian translator who was going to listen to him and then speak it back in German. And he had such a thick Roman dialect that the translator was like, hold on, I'm gonna need to ask him to do it again. Like the translator, like, but I haven't seen that video, but apparently it's out there. So,
All
um,
right.
well, let me ask you: is it interesting to you how it's finally sort of coming over to the United States? Like, I know we talked about
Hmm.
Portland, and then I also mentioned to you, so in the US we have the MLS, and then we have a league below that called United League Soccer, and the team that I like is a team called the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Pittsburgh is my hometown. I live in Los Angeles now, but Pittsburgh's my hometown. And they kind of have a little bit. I mean, when you look at their fan section, you see like anti-racist logos and flags, and you see rainbow flags. And so I don't think it's like super like huge, but there's a little bit of that going on there. And
Hmm.
my best guess is because of, fans looking at something like St. Pauli and wanting to create it, like you
Hmm.
mentioned.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, the good thing about this is also it adds a positive kind of atmosphere, right? As well,
Mhm.
if it's a friendly ultra, as I should say.
Sure.
Um, Question is for that. I mean, it's interesting. Like I said, obviously soccer's taking up, and I guess when soccer first got big in America in the 1920s, and it almost had a really good league in, didn't it, the American Soccer League, and then it kind of fizzled out after the 1930 stock market crash and things, Wall Street crash. But that was sort of based on a lot of migrant communities at the time, so Scottish players, Irish players, English players, Portuguese players as well, actually. And I guess now that sort of the changing demographics of the United States is free soccer-based players, right? A lot of Latin American people, players with Latin American or fans with Latin American background, maybe, kind of, as well as people who enjoy watching European football as well, and so they've probably seen that influence on television. Um, what intrigues me is that the St. Paulification, or if you want to call it that, if that's a thing, of football isn't. It's quite word of internet, if you know what I mean. It's not like if
Yeah.
you watch the major leagues like the Premier League or La Liga in Spain, you don't necessarily see that kind of activity, whereas you would if you followed a club on the internet or on YouTube, on YouTube or Instagram or something like that, or you'd actually gone to Germany and watched St. Pauli yourself. Um, and so it's intriguing how it got there and who it's influencing and how to what extent is it infusing? I mean, is it just like a few people with one big flag, or is it like the whole stadium getting involved? Do you know what I mean? Whereas St.
Right.
Pauli's kind of become a bit of an ethos, a bit of a, if I walk down the street with my St. Pauli t-shirt on and I see someone walking the same way with another St. Pauli t-shirt, we kind of exchange knowing glances.
Yeah.
We know why what do we support, the brand or do you support the club? You know what I mean? So I don't know where they
Right.
are in the Zwei Bundesliga right now. The second German division. But I know what they stand for, and I'm quite down with that.
Yeah, I mean, here in the US, 'cause there's like a St. Pauli club in Los Angeles.
Mm,
And I would say that for the most part here in the US, it would just be assumed like it's not uncommon to see a St. Pauli logo like along with like an anti-fascist logo.
mm,
Like that's pretty common. And I saw that out in Japan actually. I was in Tokyo and I went to
oh, cool.
kind of like a lefty punk bar and there was a St.
Mm,
Pauli logo there.
mm,
Along with other things. So yeah. So yeah, it's just it's always been a very fascinating topic to me. And now that it seems to be seeping into the United States for to the best of my knowledge, the first time in my lifetime.
mm. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. 'Cause obviously, it's not. I say not a massive sport. It's not one of the mainstream ones, is it? In the States,
No.
it's not like NFL or even hockey. If you're from Pittsburgh, so you're probably
I'm a big hockey
Penguins
guy.
fan. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I'm a
I've been
big
there a
hockey
couple of
guy.
times. Got family in Pittsburgh, so I've been to. Do like going to. Oh, what's the stadium called now?
Console Energy is the hockey one.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
Console Energy, yeah, but it's had a few different actually, it might be different now to tell you the truth.
Mm,
I might be a name or 2 ago, but yeah, it's always changing. And then the Steelers play at a place it's called like a Krisher or something like that. That they recently changed the name of that. I still go back and visit my family there, but yeah, I'm not always super abreast to what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I think, and this is probably a bit of a generalization, and also I'm a bit biased because I'm a pretty big left wing guy myself, but I think generally speaking, most people in the U.S. that are really into football, football, soccer, it's either because of family history or if they just kind of came to it themselves. There's a good chance their politics are like center or left of center, or like generally speaking, because you have to seek it out a little bit more,
Mm.
and things like that. It's not mainstream, and it's not, there's a certain sort of, I don't know if worldliness is the right way to put it, but it's sort of like the underrepresented thing. So,
Mm.
the people that migrate to it usually tend to be a bit more left leaning.
No, that's interesting. Do you know how the word soccer came about, by the way?
I know the brief, because it was soccer first, and then there was some kind of like argument, and then it was football. Am I correct?
Well, no. Here's the thing, because I've over here in the UK, people quite often really don't like the word soccer
Right.
when people use it. However, it's actually an English guy who came up with it. So his name was Charles Rayford Brown. He played for a side called the Corinthians, who were a famous touring club. They're very, gentlemen amateurs from the 1880s and 90s, and they would tour the world, like literally tour the world, like South Africa, South America, lots of Europe, United States as well, playing exhibition matches to kind of show how the game should be played. And because it's an abbreviation of the word association, football. So it's the Football Association rules as opposed to the rugby rules, which was rugger. And so soccer, that's allegedly the origins of it. So I mean, it's very useful as well because everyone has a code of football, which is basically just kicking a ball. So you have NFL over there. Australia has Australian rules football. However, that's mostly in the state of Victoria. If I went to the next door state in New South Wales, football is rugby league, which is
Mm.
a different code of rugby union, which is so. And then if you go across, rugby union is what they play in New Zealand predominantly, which they call football. So it's kind of, and in Ireland they've got Gaelic football. So actually, soccer is a really, really useful term. We know what it means. It's the round ball one. You know what I mean? So it's like actually. I find soccer very useful, but yeah, I don't use it in the UK. I'm happy to use it with a predominantly US audience, because I think we know what we're all talking about. So, but yeah,
Well,
if anyone has,
sometimes we just kind of have to. Like sometimes, even if I'm talking to a person over there, I'll have,
mm,
because if I just say football, they think I'm talking about, my American football.
yeah,
So I have to be like, they're like, "Oh yeah, do you like the Steelers?" And I'm like, "No, no, no. I mean what we call soccer. I like that." But yeah.
but if you ever hear over here and anyone has a go at you for saying soccer, then just point out it was an English guy who came up with the term anyway. So,
Well, so what do you got coming up as we're closing out here? Feel free to plug away any projects that you have.
oh
Let people know where to find your books if they
yeah,
want to take a deeper dive into all this.
yeah. I mean, basically, outside right. So that's WRITE. So it's a play on words, and a play on the number 7 position on the so outsideright.co.uk. You can follow me on social media. So Twitter stroke X. I'll never call it X. I'm always going to call it Twitter.
Amen.
Facebook, kind of. Instagram mostly every day. And then there's a podcast as well, Outside Right. So it comes out every 2 weeks. And again, I try to get interesting guests who we're talking about travel, culture, and history around football. So, thinking about it, the game a bit more from a social point of view. So this week's podcast was, for example, about a guy who ground hopped every round of the FA Cup from the start, which is basically like little village clubs, all the way to the final, which was Manchester City against Manchester United, you might remember. So the first ever Manchester derby, weirdly, there had not been one before in the final. And then the week before, 2 weeks before that, we were doing Portuguese football and history. The guys written a book about that. So there's something for everyone, pretty much. I try to keep it really broad as much as possible. Like I said, I'm working on a book on Irish football myself. I kind of been doing some ground hopping over there recently, and that will be out early next year at the moment. So look out for that. But yeah, just if you follow on social, we get all the latest. And my books, like I said, Origin Stories: The Pioneers Who Took Football to the World, was it's basically a chapter by chapter story of how the game got started, including chapters on the United States, which is a kind of big missed opportunity. It could have been one of the big soccer playing nations, but it didn't happen. I find out why in that book, and then also the Defiant History of Football Against Fascism, which is kind of, I think, how you found me, right?
Yes.
So that's more just about the political side, particularly a particular aspect. Well, I thought it was quite timely, and the book just seems to get more and more timely, weirdly, as things
Well,
progress.
we're living through interesting times, to say the
Oh yeah,
least. So, well, thank you so much for doing this, Chris. I really appreciate you highlighting all this stuff, and I learned a lot.
thanks for having me on, Ron.